This video is brought to you by Squarespace and their new design intelligence. In 1966, Star Trek launched the USS Enterprise into our collective imagination, a futuristic vessel exploring the stars in peace. But 2 years earlier, the US Air Force designed a ship of its own, also saucer-shaped, also crewed, built not for exploration, but for war. It wasn't fiction, it wasn't a movie prop, it was a classified Cold War concept for a spacecraft designed to orbit the Earth, carry nuclear bombs, and strike targets from space. It had no name worthy of a starship, just a weird-sounding lenticular re-entry vehicle. If it had launched, it could have changed the way wars were fought forever, and no one was supposed to know. The Cold War atmosphere was electric with ambition and paranoia. Intercontinental ballistic missiles were evolving, but they lacked a certain sort of flexibility. Space, the new high ground, promised both surveillance and surprise. And so the Air Force quietly tasked North American aviation to design a new platform that could patrol the Earth's orbit like a silent sentinel, watching, waiting, and if necessary, striking. Hence the birth of the LRV conceptual study. Now, I know what you're thinking. I don't want to watch yet another flying saucers conspiracy theory video, but wait, flying saucers were pretty real. Let me explain. The saucer design wasn't just chosen for its futuristic looks, it had a solid aerodynamic rationale behind it. The lenticular shape offered several benefits. It provided natural stability at hypersonic speeds, it created a broad, blunt surface for heat dissipation during re-entry, and it could generate modest lift, allowing a controlled glide back to Earth rather than a steep ballistic fall. This combination made it an appealing option for a reusable spacecraft that needed to both survive re-entry and reach a precise landing site. But the lenticular fascination didn't start with the LRV. The United States and its allies had long been experimenting with unconventional aircraft designs, some of them strikingly saucer-like. Perhaps the most popular was the Avro Canada VZ9 Avrocar, a genuine attempt in the 1950s to build a VTOL flying saucer for the US military. Shaped like a dinner plate with a fan in the center, the Avrocar hovered a few feet off the ground and barely made it past prototype testing. It was unstable, underpowered, and ultimately scrapped. Still, it reflected a serious belief at the time that saucer-shaped airframes might offer a tactical advantage in vertical flight and maneuverability. And going back even further, in the 1940s, there was the Vought V173, better known as the Flying Pancake. This experimental US Navy aircraft had a bizarre flat circular wing and twin propellers mounted on the wingtips. It flew surprisingly well, slow, but with excellent lift and stability at low speeds. The Flying Pancake was designed to operate from short runways or carrier decks, and while it never entered production, it too showed that odd shapes could, under the right conditions, take to the skies. And we've actually got a whole video about the Flying Pancake right here on the channel, which you can watch after this one. NASA also explored lenticular capsule concepts for the Apollo program, and this is likely where the idea behind the LRV was born, because one of its aerodynamicists, Alain Caillet, after his idea was rejected for the Apollo program, actually started working for North American Aviation. So NAA would actually create a detailed study of manned orbital deterrent systems, of which the LRV was just one configuration. Others included winged, ballistic, and other lifting body concepts. So to sum up the flying saucer story, Air Force's LRV design was built on a growing body of knowledge. Lenticular vehicles had demonstrated promising characteristics in wind tunnels and subscale tests. And in the context of the program, looking for a crewed, nuclear-capable re-entry vehicle, it offered a practical balance between stability, heat protection, and glide recovery. And plenty of room for all sorts of nasty treats inside. 3, 2, 1, liftoff! And another amazing spacecraft launches out of the atmosphere. But back in the mid-19th century, you would have not have heard all about this launch, because they didn't have a website. That's right, they should have used the new Squarespace Design Intelligence. The amazing Squarespace website creator has come back, combining 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with their own cutting-edge AI technology to now give you the best possible website you could ever have. Squarespace will actually recommend a fantastic design based off your goals and create a more personalized website that gives you a great digital identity and will never look like a template again. But building a website on Squarespace is only the beginning, because you can also run email campaigns, you can run educational courses if you want to teach something, or if you're like me, you can run a fan website with plenty of merch. That's right, I use Squarespace to run the official foundandexplain.shop website, where you can get all sorts of stuff to help support the channel. But if you'd rather have a website instead, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to www.squarespace.com/found to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's right, the FOUND is my special code that helps me and helps the channel and helps you get a great deal at Squarespace. The LRV was imagined as a squat, disc-shaped spacecraft with a domed top and flat underside. The tail section was slightly truncated, housing the engines and the stabilizers. And inside the LRV, living conditions were surprisingly well thought out. The off-duty area, located on the starboard side, provided bunks, sanitation, food storage, and even exercise equipment. The on-duty section of the port side included the weapon control consoles, communications, and repair tools. Both compartments had access to the weapons bay through an airlock, and each compartment could be sealed off in case of a puncture or depressurization. The escape capsule was located in the nose and featured a parachute beneath. In case of booster failure during launch, a solid propellant engine would eject it from the vehicle, allowing recovery by said parachute. The capsule included all the necessary life support and navigation equipment for a safe return, and was designed to keep the crew alive even after the catastrophic failure of the main vehicle. An article from Popular Mechanics in 2000 suggested that a miniature nuclear reactor at the rear would generate the power for light support, sensors, and guidance systems. And between the crew and the reactor, shielding would prevent lethal radiation exposure, at least in theory. However, in reality, a nuclear power option was only one of the suggestions for a 7 kilowatt power hungry electrical system. In fact, engineering and safety analysis indicated that a solar thermal system would be more effective. The vehicle was designed for 6-week orbital missions, carrying enough supplies and systems redundancy to support a crew of 4. And the payload? Up to 4 thermonuclear warheads tucked within an internal bay, plus possibly an external weapons pod. If needed, the LRV could transition from a reconnaissance platform to an orbital bomber within minutes. A mission would begin at the launch pad, with the LRV riding atop a heavy lift rocket, like a modified Titan III or even a Saturn-class booster. Once in orbit, the vehicle would stabilize itself and begin surveillance operations. It would pass silently over potential adversaries, gathering intelligence and waiting for orders. If a strike was authorized, the crew would execute a deorbit burn, dip into the atmosphere above the target zone, and release its warheads. After the release, the LRV would begin its own descent into the blazing apocalypse. But let's not get all pessimistic here. In general, for re-entry, the saucer would flip belly first and ride its own shockwave through the atmosphere. At subsonic speeds, aerodynamic flaps would deploy, allowing the craft to glide towards a landing zone, typically a desert lake bed. It would skid to a stop on its flat bottom, intact and potentially reusable. But then came the reality check. Despite the elegance of the design, the project quickly ran into formidable challenges. Radiation shielding in such a small craft, long-term life support, and precision re-entry control all pushed the limits of 1960s engineering. Yeah, remember, it's still the 1960s. Testing of the flying nuclear reactors on NB-36H was actually stopped in 1961 when the engineers figured out that a flying Chernobyl wasn't that good of an idea. The vehicle's dual role, both as a bomber and a crewed glider, meant compromises in almost every system. Beyond the technical problems, politics also intervened. International momentum was growing to prevent the militarization of space. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty would soon forbid deploying nuclear weapons to orbit. Even before that, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's emphasis on cost-cutting and effective deterrence led to the cancellation of many futuristic military projects, including the X-20 Dyna-Soar. The LRV quickly followed, its funding evaporated, and its ambitions shelved. No full-scale prototype of the lenticular re-entry vehicle was ever built. Subscale models were likely tested in wind tunnels, but the LRV never left Earth. For decades, the program remained completely classified, known only to those within the Air Force Black Projects Division. Declassified documents from the late 1990s revealed details of the LRV study, and in the year 2000, Popular Mechanics ran a feature on the vehicle, dubbing it America's Nuclear Flying Saucer. The public was stunned. A flying saucer weapon had been real, if only on paper. It didn't take long for the LRV to enter pop cultural lore. Decades of UFO sightings suddenly had a shadow of plausibility. If the Air Force had designed a disc-shaped space weapon, could have people seen test versions of it? Probably not, but the overlap in shape and secrecy was enough to spark imaginations. In reality, the LRV was never an alien craft. It was never a warp drive mystery. It was a thorough human invention, bold, logical, and steeped in Cold War deterrence theory, with a tad of lunacy and paranoia. The similarities to UFOs was completely coincidental, or at most, aesthetic. But let's pretend for a second and put on our tinfoil hats and discuss what could have been. Had the LRV been built, it would have marked a turning point in human history, the first nuclear bomber in space, orbiting Earth with a human crew ready to strike. Its existence would have escalated the arms race into the heavens and likely triggered a parallel Soviet response. The militarization of space may have accelerated beyond return. And if the Soviets didn't build such a spacecraft in time, the US would have dominated them technologically in a way that mutually assured destruction would become a thing of the past and the doors to World War III would be wide open. Fortunately, or wisely, it never came to that. Instead, the LRV remains a historical curiosity, and although it never flew, the LRV left a legacy. It advanced thinking about lifting body re-entry, influenced later spaceplane ideas, and pushed boundaries in crewed orbital mission design. In many ways, it foreshadowed the space shuttle, reusable, gliding and crewed, but with a much darker mission profile. It was a ghost of Cold War imagination nearly made real. What do you think would have happened if it had launched? Let us know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching the video.